I'm RC Jim. This is now the second in our series of videos on some of the basics in radio control. And in this particular one, we're having a look at these transmitters and why you might want to choose one versus another. So, watch. Okay, let's consider the points of difference between these various transmitters. Flysky, super little transmitter and compatible receivers, 8 channels. You've got 4 switches, 2 dials, your normal sticks. You got trim controls. Trim controls work a little bit different. They're like little joysticks that work just fine. One thing that you're always having difficulty with when you're trimming a plane is you're watching the plane, and when you're not quite sure where the trim tabs are. You know, these are trim tabs that you click it to make changes, and multiple clicks makes multiple changes to change the trim one way or the other. So if it's gradually going up, you want to trim it down a little bit, so you push forward a little bit on that trim tab, bring it down until the thing stays level. Or if it's going to one side, you might need to give a couple of taps on this to get it over. But you're doing that while you're looking at something else, and it can be difficult to find where they are. With a simple radio like this, it's got just a little joystick. So this little button down here is just like the joystick. It can go right, it can go left, it can go up, it can go down. And so you basically get the plane flying along till it's more or less level, and then you get your finger down here on the trim tab, and you just basically doing little taps on this, just like with the joystick itself, to get what you want. The overall package is very small, very light. Small, good and bad. You know, the sticks are smaller. Both these sticks, where you can adjust them in and out, but you're starting out with a basic smaller one and this basic larger one. I really haven't noticed a difference in flying. You know, they all work. Biggest downside of the Flysky is back when I bought this radio, it only had one 3-position switch. The other switches were just 2-position, and you know, as you start thinking about landing gear and flaps and modes and stabilization, well, you wouldn't have stabilization with this most likely anyway, but all the different things you might want to do, you really want more switches. And in particular, I wanted a 3-position switch over here, so I've actually added one. Didn't come with that. But one nice thing about the radio is you can configure any of these switches to be 3-position switch, to where you just replace the switch, and you go into the software and you just tell it that's now a 3-position switch, and it'll recognize that. So a nice entry-level radio, with the downside being that your receivers and stuff that you have in the plane aren't necessarily going to be terribly compatible with your next radio. As you think about the Spektrum, this was recommended to me by my club, the president of the club, who was the guy that did the training with me when I got back into the hobby again after a lapse where everything had changed in the hobby in terms of technical type stuff. But anyway, this is what he recommended, being solid, dependable. You know, everybody uses them. Well, lots of people use them, and especially in our club. They are really good in terms of the features and plenty of switches. The NX6 doesn't have any dials, and so that's a big problem for some things. As you get into the NX8 and then NX10, then you get various dials and sliders and things like that. But nonetheless, the Spektrum was a good radio. They've got some fantastic technology that they've developed. They got their smart technology where a lot of information can be brought to the radio with regard to the battery, with regard to the ESC, things that are happening in the system. In terms of battery charging and things like that, more automated functions and all. But for me, the smart technology was never a big selling point. It's all more expensive type stuff, and the basic stuff was fine for me. But nonetheless, the Spektrum is a good radio. And I've mentioned before, you got 2 antennas with Spektrum, so naturally you want this vertical one to be perpendicular to where the plane is going to be most of the time. But it might be the plane ends up straight up above you, so then it's good to have that horizontal one that's in there as well. So that's a nice feature with regard to the Spektrum. Radiomaster, fabulous radio with the open source software, all kinds of stuff being developed. Fabulous display, color touchscreen display that can be customized in all kinds of different ways. When you get into the details of what's going on in the radio, just all kinds of stuff that you can adjust and work through and stuff like that. Yeah, just like it in so many different ways. And of course, when you have something like an NX, they do have ways to add things to it, but nothing in comparison to something like the Radiomaster with that JR module on the back to be able to put in the different modules there. The dials, you've got sliders on the side, and of course that one I've got done for screen brightness. This one's I got for volume on the thing, but you know, it can be used for all kinds of different things. And just a great radio in terms of functionality and a lot of development being done on it. Something like Joysway I wouldn't even mess with. I bought this one with a sailboat, you know, so. But it's a 4-channel radio and it would work. One of the things that you need to think about is how many channels you need. As I mentioned, I began in the more recent years with the Spektrum. And it has 7 channels. It's an NX6, but it has a 7th channel. And by upgrading the firmware in this radio, you can actually more than double the number of channels. So with the current radio, that would be plenty for pretty much anything that you're doing. But back when I got this, and as I was getting more planes and things like that, I had a dive bomber that I had flaps, dive flaps. I had separate aileron channels for each side. Of course, you got throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder. Let's see, we had stabilization, both the on and off, and the rates, you know. And so if I had absolutely everything going, we're talking about 10 channels. But I figured, forget about the stabilization and the rates and stuff like that. Everything else, I needed 8 channels, and this couldn't do that. The NX8 was horribly expensive. Not quite double the price of this particular one, but pretty near double the price just to go to 8 channels with Spektrum. And with Radiomaster, with a 4-in-1 module, it was compatible and had 16 channels, which is more than I could ever imagine using. So the number of channels, you have to think about it. You need basically 4 to do basic flying functions, but something like the 6 or 7 channels is probably pretty important. It's nice to be able to add landing gear and flaps. And then, of course, if you're going to use stabilization, you know, landing gear, flaps, and stabilization, you can function with the NX6, but just barely. And really you want an 8-channel to do that properly. Okay, mechanical construction, how sturdy the case is. You know, something like this Flysky seems really, you know, very, very light on in terms of quality. Radiomaster, really nice feel. And by the way, you can get, well, they ship it with 2 different styles of grips on the back to make it comfortable. It's rather hefty, that goes along with that, but obviously solidly built. The NX, I'd say, is a little bit lighter than the Radiomaster. Again, a pretty nice feel. In terms of quality, durability, and things like that, the one problem I have had with the NX is 2 times we've had to replace the USB connector in the back. If you get a cable in there and the thing is sitting flat on a surface, typically it's getting interfered with by what it's sitting on, and the more you yank around that, the more it works loose. And I've just had to replace that one the second time, and you can see a video on doing that. Radiomaster has been very durable. I haven't had to do anything with it, so very solid in that particular way. How strong the self-centering is. Now with the Radiomaster, I actually like the feel of the Spektrum a little bit better. It's just a little bit tighter springs on the Radiomaster. Now they actually ship it with a different set of springs, I mean with an extra set of springs to where you can adjust that. And I might do that eventually, but after a while with a pokey end on the stick, which all of them have, although I guess the Radiomaster is a little bit sharper than the Spektrum. But anyway, with the Radiomaster, after flying for quite a while, you know, you get sort of feeling like it's digging into your thumb. The other thing I've noticed with the Radiomaster is in here near the middle, the throttle doesn't stay put. And I'm told that that can be adjusted, so I'm going to look into that. And that actually is a contributing factor to one accident that I had not a while back, that I'm sitting there, you know, waiting to land and flying around quite a distance away. And whether it was my lazy thumb or that tendency of this thing to want to go down, basically reduce the throttle and end up stalling and spinning the thing. So anyway, that can be adjusted, but that's one negative thing to how this is right at the moment anyway. Number of dials and sliders, we've mentioned that. That's a big difference. Number of switches, whether the 2-position, 3-position. The length of the switches is also important. When you've got to move inside, you want longer switches down there. So we got long ones in the back, shorter ones in the front, shorter ones on the outside, longer ones on the inside. When you get into something like this Flysky, the way it came, there was longer ones on the inside, but when I swapped the switches to be able to get a compatible switch that was 3-position, it had to be short. So at least I got the rubber on it so I can feel the difference there, but it would be better to have the longer switch on the inside. Spektrum does have that on theirs. They've done that same sort of thing. Longer ones in the back, longer ones on the inside. Now, a significant point of difference with Radiomaster is the gimbals. Radiomaster has Hall effect gimbals. Now, with most of your radio transmitters, they will have a potentiometer in the gimbal. And with a potentiometer, you've got surfaces rubbing together, sort of changing the resistance as it moves across. You know, it could be coils of wire. Back in the old days it'd be that, but I imagine nowadays they've got some sort of a carbon surface or something or other that the follower is going on. But as it moves across, it changes the resistance, and the electronics sense that, and that determines the position of the control. With a Hall effect gimbal, there's no rubbing. It basically creates a magnetic field, and that magnetic field moves across some electronics which detect what's happening with it, and that's what determines the position of the control. So there's nothing to wear out in the electronics. And actually, any of them will have bearings in the gimbal, and you know, they could develop slop and that type of thing. Obviously, that would take a long period of time to do that. If you were a professional and using it an awful lot, you might want to go to the precision machined gimbals on the Radiomaster. Rather expensive, but they would be much more durable in terms of the bearings and the overall construction, and with that has less give in the building of it to where it'd be more precise. But practically, I don't think you'd know the difference between them. Just another thought with regard to the Radiomaster is you got a color touch screen. And as you compare the screen of the Radiomaster with, say, the Spektrum, you can see the size is significantly different between the two. And then you have a lot more information that can be displayed on the Radiomaster, and it's all customizable. So, really great screen as far as being able to do that type of thing, all kinds of things you can display on there. Both of them will have multiple screens, but certainly the Radiomaster is a notch better. You might wonder why you need so many switches and dials and things such as that. Well, let me just give you an example here with my radio. Naturally, you need your sticks to have control. You need your trim tabs to be able to adjust trim. This has got 2 extra trim tabs that I don't use. But on the switches, I've got landing gear, I've got stabilization, turning on and off, I got flight mode, flaps, degree of stabilization. This dial I don't use. This one turns on and off elevons when I've got elevons on a plane. This one turns on and off the rudder mix when I've got that on a plane. This is my throttle cut. This resets the timer. I don't use these buttons across here. And then there's these sliders on the side, and I use this one to control the brightness of the screen, and I use this one to control the volume on the speaker. Sometimes, especially if I'm at home playing around with this, I turn the speaker off so that my wife doesn't have to listen to it. So the thought is that the vast majority of these, certainly all of the switches I use, and I use one of the two dials, and I use both sliders. So the vast majority of things on this radio I really need, and I use them. Whether or not it has a bay on the back for accessories, this is the only one of these radios here that has that. Whether it's designed to be simple, doing as much as possible for you, or intended to for someone who is happy to do things that are more complex, but having more options and capabilities. So your Radiomaster, more complex, can probably do more stuff. You know, limited fame, but with Spektrum, they keep trying to be clever and doing things. Say, for example, setting up flaps is far easier on a Spektrum than it is on a Radiomaster. They got a menu item for it, and it does a lot of the stuff that needs to be done. Can be done with a Radiomaster. It's just you have to, you know, put in the program items yourself. Spektrum does a better job of sort of making it all stock standard and easy to set up. Okay, how telemetry and other data can be recorded in a flight log. Radiomaster is far better than Spektrum with regard to that. Spektrum, if you have it record data log, is just a single log file that keeps getting added onto with each flight. It's something that you need either the iPhone app or special software to be able to read it. Radiomaster is a simple file that is a spreadsheet. It's a CSV spreadsheet that can be read with any spreadsheet software. Very easy to download it. You just plug in the cable, hook it up to your computer, get the file. It has a separate file for each flight, and the file name begins with the name of the plane that you've given in the transmitter, so it's very clear which file it is. It has the date and the time stamp on that file, so you very quickly work out what the flights are. Spektrum, when it's recording things such as frame losses and fades and stuff like that, it keeps adding them together, because the Spektrum is basically set up to say that after the flight you do a couple of clicks here and it shows you a summary of the flight, and that will be the total of the fades and the total of the frame losses and things such as that. With Spektrum, it's actually recording them as they happen, so it's not just giving you a cumulative sort of thing, but every time there's a frame loss it shows you, and so it's easier to see where problems might be in a flight with a Spektrum, with a Radiomaster than it would be with a Spektrum. So I would say Radiomaster is better in terms of analyzing a flight after the flight. Spektrum is fine as far as the information it gives you immediately related to the flight. There's also a difference with regard to flexibility and working with different protocols. Spektrum is noted for making everything to only work with their own stuff. You know, they're just really locked into their own thing, and as much as possible they're pushing the Spektrum radio stuff with the E-flite plane stuff and making all of their stuff work together, and it works together great, but it's all designed to work with its own proprietary system with their own brands that are related to it. Something like Radiomaster or Jumper, things like that, they're designed to be able to work with whatever you might need. And so you can have the ELRS, you can have the 4-in-1 module. And by the way, as you think about 4-in-1, that's not just simply saying 4 different brands. What it's saying is it's got 4 different computer chips in there, with those computer chips, each one being used by multiple different brands. And so given that it's got the 4 computer chips in there, it can decide which chip to use, and then it's just the software that determines how to use that chip to make it work with brand X versus brand Y, sort of a thing. You know, there would be like 30 different brands and protocols and things like that that a 4-in-1 module can work with. So greatest amount of flexibility with something like the Radiomaster. Whether you have 1 or 2 antennas, we've already mentioned that before, and whether or not you've got an internal receiver to use as a master transmitter for setting up a buddy box. Now, with Radiomaster, the 4-in-1 module can be used as a receiver. But if you're using that as a receiver, you can't also use it as a transmitter. So you need another module. If it's 4-in-1 internal, you need another module on the back to be used as a transmitter. The internal 4-in-1 module can be used to receive the signal, but it has to have something to send it out. Spektrum already has the extra receiver in it, so given that you've got a DSMX transmitter that can send a signal to it, it will receive that. So have a look at our videos on buddy box setups to see what can be done with that. And then we also talk a lot about the various things you can do with the Radiomaster to function just like the Spektrum does. Well, thank you for watching. I trust that this has been helpful. One more video to go in this series of 3 on the basics of radio control. So you'll want to have a look at this link over here to see this next one, which is all about the terminology used in radio control, what some of the abbreviations mean and some of the terms and stuff like that. And I think you'll find that helpful as well. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe. Keep all of these things handy. There's so much on our channel that you'll find handy in our hobby and interesting, and maybe even have a laugh or two at some of the dumb things I do. But nonetheless, it's all good stuff, and I'm providing it to be a help and a blessing to you. So you have a great day and enjoy your flying.